Wilson. Aya Wilson made headlines, not for her game, but for her ego. When she proclaimed she could take down NBA players in one-on-one, it wasn't about women's empowerment. It was about attention. That's why male athletes responded. Wilson didn't enter a private debate. She issued a public challenge. And while Beverly played along, perhaps for clout, others like Michael Porter Jr. called it what it was: unrealistic. His brutal honesty lit up Angel McCree's outrage. But instead of discussing the legitimacy of Wilson's claim, McCree spiraled into a tirade on gender roles and family obligations, dodging the central point entirely.
If you're here for the real story and not the filtered version, subscribe. And if you're sticking around for the next meltdown, you better definitely subscribe.
Angel McCree. Folder not found. Create new folder. Angel McCree. This wasn't about men attacking women. It was about a woman making an extraordinary claim and refusing to engage with fair critique. Wilson stepped into the arena, but flinched when the spotlight shifted. If we're serious about equality in sports, we can't insulate bold statements from honest reactions. The backlash Wilson faced wasn't cruel, it was earned. And the emotional smokescreens that followed only highlight the problem. A refusal to confront the reality of competition when gender is involved. Aya Wilson didn't get canceled. She didn't get ambushed. She didn't stumble into a controversy she didn't see coming. She started it. This entire firestorm kicked off because she made a bold, headline-grabbing statement that she could beat NBA players one-on-one. Not as a joke, not as a playful tease, as a serious claim, something meant to challenge, provoke, and stir the pot. And that's exactly what it did. She threw it out there knowing the weight her words carry as a professional athlete, as a WNBA MVP, as one of the league's most recognizable faces. It was intentional, but the second that energy got matched, the second actual NBA players responded with bluntness instead of blind praise, the narrative twisted faster than a spin move in the paint. And suddenly, she's the victim? No. This is the kind of moment that shows how differently we treat male and female athletes in the public sphere. A male player says something over the top. He gets roasted, debated, dissected, and fact-checked within minutes. But when Aya Wilson stepped out and made a direct challenge to the legitimacy of NBA-level competition and got called out for it, the response wasn't, hey, maybe she was overreaching. No, it turned into, why are men so insecure? That's the deflection. That's the misdirection that turned a conversation about athletic capability into a hand-wringing seminar about gender dynamics. And it didn't stop there. Because after the backlash, it wasn't Wilson who clarified, doubled down, or took responsibility for the conversation she initiated. It was Angel McCree who jumped into the fire, not to engage with the actual point, but to redirect the spotlight entirely. She went off in a full-blown tirade about how men are obsessed with women's sports, about how female athletes have to juggle motherhood and physical strain and emotional burdens that men could never understand. And while that all might be true in its own context, it had absolutely nothing to do with what was being discussed. This wasn't about family planning or emotional labor. It was about one person claiming she could outplay elite athletes, and then acting shocked when elite athletes responded. And let's not act like the male reactions came out of nowhere. They were directly tied to Wilson's comment. That's not speculation. That's the actual sequence of events. Patrick Beverley's response? Clearly pandering. Saying Wilson could take NBA players wasn't just unrealistic. It was disingenuous. He wasn't defending her. He was fishing for internet points. The man practically handed her a social media participation trophy. Then came Michael Porter Jr., and he did the exact opposite. He called it out for what it was. Said he's been destroying women in basketball since the 8th grade. And that response? That's what blew the lid off. Suddenly, he wasn't just disagreeing. He was labeled hostile, misogynistic, triggered. But he didn't initiate anything. He reacted. Bluntly? Sure. But dishonestly? Not even close. What makes this even more frustrating is how fast the timeline got rewritten. Somehow, people started acting like the men were the instigators. That they went out of their way to put down women. That they were randomly attacking the WNBA. That's flat out false. The entire debate was sparked by Wilson's own statement. That's where it started. Male players didn't go looking for a fight. They were pulled into it. Wilson, and what's worse, once the reactions started coming in, they weren't treated as part of a normal sports debate. They were treated like acts of aggression, as if criticizing a public claim is some kind of personal vendetta. Wilson didn't just make a statement. She lit a match and walked away when it burned too hot. She opened the door to debate, and when people walked through it, suddenly they were being accused of breaking in. This is where the double standard becomes impossible to ignore. Male athletes are held to the fire constantly, criticized for arrogance, for talking trash, for making wild predictions. And most of them take the heat because that's the job. That's what comes with making bold claims in competitive sports. But when a high-profile WNBA player says she could beat NBA players and then ducks the fallout while others defend her with emotional appeals and gender politics, that's not equality. That's immunity. That's building a shield around someone who should be held just as accountable as any other athlete making those kinds of statements. Angel McCree's defense was loud, emotional, and completely off-topic. She talked about the strength and sacrifice of women athletes. Fair, valid, but irrelevant. She used it to deflect from the fact that Wilson's claim was flawed from the beginning. The focus was never on whether women work hard. Everyone knows they do. The question was whether Wilson, a WNBA player, could actually take on NBA competition in a one-on-one setting. And when you strip away the distractions, the answer is obvious. It's not about effort. It's not about gender roles. It's about physicality, pace, size, and competition level. It's about reality. And let's talk about that final twist, the myth of male insecurity. That old, overused line about how men are just threatened by strong women. That argument gets thrown around anytime a man disagrees with a bold female claim. But let's really look at what happened here. The male athletes weren't out hunting for Wilson's takes. They responded to it. They were named, tagged, or baited into the conversation. And when they answered, some with cringe pandering, some with harsh honesty, they got slammed anyway. If that's not a trap, what is? Josh Hart gave a lukewarm, predictable nah, I don't think she could response, and still caught heat. Jason Williams said what a lot of former players were already thinking, and he got labeled disrespectful. At this point, unless you're outright lying to protect feelings, you're getting painted as part of the problem. And the worst part? That reaction shuts down real discussion. Because yes, it should be okay to say, no, Wilson would not beat NBA players in a one-on-one game. That's not hatred. That's not fragility. That's just honesty. But we live in a moment where athletes are being praised for boldness and then shielded from pushback. Where one side of the debate gets to claim confidence and the other side gets accused of having a complex. Where women are applauded for ambition and men are dragged for realism. That's not a fair game. That's rigged discourse. Wilson. If we're ever going to have honest conversations about equity in sports, we have to be able to hold everyone to the same standard. That means calling out ridiculous claims, no matter who says them. That means accepting that criticism is not cruelty. That feedback is not hate. That honesty is not oppression. Wilson started this debate. She didn't get ambushed. She wasn't misrepresented. She made the statement, and now she's being held to it. The way forward isn't through emotional deflection or painting critics as villains. It's through honest dialogue, through acknowledging that bold claims come with bold consequences, through understanding that in sports, respect isn't given just because you ask for it. It's earned by what happens on the court. So what do you think? Was Wilson just being confident, or did she bite off more than she could chew? Were the male athletes out of line, or were they just being real? Should women be able to make bold claims without criticism? Or does equality mean everyone gets challenged the same? Let us know in the comments. Like if you're tired of the double standards. Share if you're done with the emotional dodgeball. And subscribe if you want more deep dives into the controversies no one else is breaking down this clearly. Because whether you're team accountability or team excuse, one thing's for sure. This one won't be forgotten anytime soon. Wilson, let's get back into it. Because this Wilson mess, it's not just about one bad take. It's about how the sports world, especially the media and fans, handle women athletes when they say something outrageous. There's this unspoken rule now. If a female athlete says something bold, it must be empowering. It must be supported. And if you disagree, even slightly, you're automatically labeled bitter, insecure, or worse. But here's the uncomfortable truth. Aya Wilson said something completely unrealistic. And instead of standing in the heat when that fire got lit, the entire machine around her tried to spin it into a morality lesson. Aya Wilson, this wasn't just about pride. This was about optics. A carefully managed perception game where Wilson got to drop a bomb, step back, and let the chaos unfold, while never taking direct accountability for the mess she made. And make no mistake, she did make it. The comment wasn't misinterpreted. It wasn't taken out of context. She said she could beat NBA players in a one-on-one. That is a huge claim. We're talking about going up against the most elite athletes in the world. Guys who spend every waking second training to be faster, stronger, more explosive. And no, it's not sexist to acknowledge that. It's not dismissive to say it's not possible. It's reality. This isn't about not believing in women. It's about not lying to them. But the moment that reality showed up, in the form of responses from NBA players like Michael Porter Jr. and Jason Williams, people acted like someone kicked over a sacred statue. Suddenly, it wasn't about whether Wilson's claim held water. It became a pity parade about how women in sports are constantly disrespected. Let's be very clear. Criticism is not disrespect. Rebuttal is not oppression. If Wilson is going to talk like a competitor, she should expect to be treated like one. No one is above being questioned, especially in sports where bold talk is part of the game. But instead of just acknowledging that, her defenders flipped the script. Angel McCree came storming in, full of passion, pain, and emotional appeal, but completely missed the point. His tirade didn't address the claim. It avoided it. Instead, she brought up motherhood, domestic responsibilities, societal pressures, everything except the issue at hand. It was an impressive deflection, sure, but that's all it was, a distraction. She painted men as obsessed, as fragile, as unable to handle strong women. But let's be honest, men didn't initiate this fight. They got dragged into it by a public statement that demanded attention. McCree tried to spin this as a gender war, but it wasn't. It was a sports debate. It became a gender war when people started pretending the men were just randomly attacking Wilson out of nowhere, as if they didn't have a right to respond to a challenge that directly involved them. Wilson, and this is the double standard that keeps showing up. When male athletes talk big, they get scrutinized. When female athletes talk big, they get celebrated and shielded. And if someone disagrees, they're labeled problematic. Where's the equality in that? If a benchwarmer from the G League said he could beat a top WNBA player, he'd be mocked relentlessly. People would quote stats, post footage, and tear him to shreds for being delusional. And rightfully so. But when Aya Wilson flips that and says she can beat NBA players, suddenly the rules change. Come on, let's not kid ourselves. This isn't about belief in women. It's about narrative control, about coddling, about avoiding any sort of real scrutiny in the name of empowerment. And where does that leave us? Stuck in a feedback loop where women athletes are encouraged to make bold claims, but never challenged on them. Where male athletes are only allowed to speak if they're being supportive, even when what they're supporting is nonsense. Where anyone with a dissenting opinion gets flattened by the weight of emotional backlash. That's not empowerment. That's infantilization. Aya Wilson is a phenomenal athlete. No one's taking that away from her. But she's also a public figure with a massive platform. And when she makes a claim as provocative as, I could beat NBA players one-on-one, it's not just a headline. It's a conversation starter. She knows that. She used that. And when it blew up, she had the chance to own it. To either double down, clarify, or walk it back. But what did she do? Nothing. Radio silence. She let others, like Beverly and McCree, carry the narrative for her. And that's weak. You don't get to start the fire, then hand the extinguisher to someone else. If you're going to talk, back it up. If you're going to flex, take the hits that come with it. Because otherwise, all of this representation stuff rings hollow. You can't demand equal treatment while playing by different rules. And speaking of those trying to play both sides, let's not let Patrick Beverley off the hook either. His response was pure internet pandering. It wasn't rooted in basketball knowledge or reality or even genuine support. It was a calculated, shallow attempt to stay in the good graces of a certain crowd. He said what he knew would get him clicks, not what he actually believed. You can tell by how over-the-top his praise was. Saying Wilson could beat NBA players wasn't just wrong, it was insulting. To NBA players, to WNBA players, to anyone who understands the game. Because when you lie to protect someone's feelings, you don't lift them up, you set them up. Beverly's take gave people like McCree permission to ignore reality. It poured gas on the fire. And when someone like Michael Porter Jr. came through with a blunt, maybe a little cocky, but honest take, it was seen as mean. But it wasn't. It was what happens when someone gets tired of watching grown adults pretend the sky isn't blue. Michael Porter Jr. didn't insert himself into the conversation. He responded. He wasn't coming for Wilson. He was reacting to Beverly's ridiculous comment. And when he said he'd been destroying women since the 8th grade, people acted like he just called for the end of women's sports. But he didn't. He simply spoke from experience. And he wasn't wrong. This idea that speaking honestly about athletic differences is somehow hateful is absurd. No one's saying women aren't talented. No one's saying they don't work just as hard. But physicality is part of the game. Biology matters. And pretending it doesn't helps no one. So here we are. Wilson. One comment from Aya Wilson spiraled into this massive, overblown controversy. Not because of what she said, but because of the way people responded to the responses. The whole thing turned into a circus with pundits, fans, and fellow athletes tripping over themselves to avoid just admitting what was obvious from the beginning. She made a ridiculous claim. People called it out. And instead of facing that like a pro, she hid behind others while the narrative got twisted beyond recognition. And now, we're left with a fractured conversation where honesty is punished, pandering is rewarded, and facts are optional. This wasn't about hate. It wasn't about insecurity. It was about accountability. And the second someone like Aya Wilson gets a pass for dodging that, the whole idea of equal standards goes out the window. So what happens next time? Next time, a high-profile woman in sports makes a bold, unbacked claim. Will the same cycle repeat? Will we keep acting like disagreement is oppression? Will we keep shielding people from the consequences of their own words? Or will we finally admit that everyone, regardless of gender, deserves to be challenged when they say something that doesn't add up? You tell me. Aya Wilson. Let's wrap this up the way it started, with brutal honesty. Aya Wilson lit the match, watched the smoke rise, and then sat back while everyone else ran around trying to explain the fire. That's what this whole thing boils down to. A public figure made a public claim and then vanished into the background when people dared to react honestly. That's not strength. That's not leadership. That's avoidance. And the worst part? The way the conversation completely lost the plot once emotions got involved. What started as a straightforward debate, can Aya Wilson beat NBA players in a one-on-one game, turned into a convoluted mess about gender, society, oppression, domestic responsibilities, and ancient talking points that had nothing to do with the issue at hand. The original claim didn't invite that level of overreach. It didn't require a TED Talk on patriarchy. It required a yes or no, maybe a little analysis, and a fair discussion. But when people like Angel McCree stepped in, the tone shifted. It wasn't about basketball anymore. It was about blame. His response, full of emotion and layered with gender-based frustration, skipped over the actual facts. She criticized men for obsessing over female athletes, when in reality, male athletes were responding to her teammates' provocation. They didn't start this. They didn't randomly bash Wilson for sport. They reacted to a claim that directly involved them. And when they responded truthfully, not even disrespectfully, just bluntly, they were accused of everything from being threatened to being misogynistic. That's not just unfair, it's manipulative. It turns accountability into villainy. It rewrites the story, so the person who made the claim is now, somehow, the victim of the very debate they started. That's the problem. We can't keep rewriting timelines to fit emotional narratives. Facts don't stop being facts just because someone doesn't like how they sound. If we're really pushing for equality in sports, then women, especially women with platforms as big as Wilson's, have to be held to the same standard of critique as anyone else. If LeBron James claimed he could dominate a WNBA season with one hand tied behind his back, the internet would torch him. He'd be dragged by analysts, media outlets, and fans on every platform. There would be think pieces, memes, outrage, and pushback, and it would be deserved, because it's a wild claim. So why does Wilson get to say the inverse without consequence? Why does she get protected from the same treatment that her male counterparts would face without question? Simple, because people are afraid to be honest. They're afraid that criticizing a woman, especially a prominent black female athlete, will get them labeled. And to be fair, that fear isn't coming out of nowhere. We've seen time and time again how nuance gets bulldozed by outrage. But honesty shouldn't be controversial. Telling the truth about a competitive mismatch in sports isn't discrimination, it's realism. Michael Porter Jr. wasn't out of pocket. He was direct, sure, maybe even a little cocky. But the guy's a 6 feet 10 inches NBA player responding to someone saying she could beat him. What's he supposed to do? Lie? Pretend it's a fair matchup? He wasn't mocking Wilson. He was defending himself and calling out the nonsense. And somehow, that's what people took issue with. Unbelievable. AWIO Wilson. What this controversy really exposed is how fragile public perception has become. We say we want equality, but when things get uncomfortable, the standards shift. Female athletes are praised for speaking boldly. But if that boldness leads to legitimate debate, we're told to back off. To support women no matter what. Even when what's being said makes no sense. That's not respect. That's patronizing. AWIO Wilson. Io Wilson deserves better than that. She deserves the same treatment any elite athlete gets, celebrated when she's right, challenged when she's wrong. Because real respect means facing the music when you miss the mark. It means answering for your words, not hiding behind defenders who change the subject to avoid uncomfortable truths. The irony in all of this is that Wilson could have owned the moment. She could have clarified her statement, admitted it was more about confidence than realism, or even doubled down and made her case. But instead, she did nothing. No follow-up, no context, no leadership. And in that vacuum, others took over the narrative. Patrick Beverley pandered. McCree ranted. Porter Jr. got vilified. And Wilson just watched. That's the part no one wants to talk about. This wasn't a hit job on women's sports. It was a reaction to one athlete stepping out of bounds and refusing to step back in. The debate didn't explode because men are insecure. It exploded because no one was allowed to say the obvious without being accused of something sinister. So here's the truth. Wilson's claim was baseless. The reactions were fair, and the fallout? Entirely avoidable. But instead of facing that, we're left with another case of selective outrage and deflected accountability. Another moment where honesty took a back seat to optics. Another missed opportunity for real dialogue about sports, competition, and standards that don't change based on who's talking. So if you're tired of watching facts get buried under feelings, speak up. If you believe all athletes, should be held to the same standard, hit that like button. Drop your take in the comments. Should Wilson have owned her statement? Were the male responses justified? Is honesty in sports officially out of style? And don't forget to subscribe. We've got more of these coming, and we're not pulling punches. Because when the drama breaks, we don't just react. We break it all the way down.